I have 3 images here, just so you have something visual to look at least initially. Then they are loosely related to 3 of the literary examples I will be discussing. So on the left, these are cornflowers. They're purple, and they show up at the end of Alice Walker's The Color Purple. She wants us to imagine a field filled with purple flowers. Upper right, this is an image of Girl Scouts in 1950s Afghanistan. I think in Kabul, but maybe I'm not sure. So I will be actually referring to Khaled Hosseini's A Thousand Splendid Suns, set in Afghanistan, covering the 1950s through the 90s. And the bottom, here's a lighthouse in the Hebrides, and I will be briefly mentioning Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Okay, so let's go. We do not need works of fiction to know about gender-based violence, and while I've been working on this, it just seemed like effortlessly incidents, numbers, phenomena concerning gender-based violence were showing up in my consciousness from the world. A UK statistic, 1 in 3 pregnant women experience domestic abuse. I found that just shocking, and that abuse can begin or escalate during pregnancy. In India, there's a phenomenon of dowry deaths, and the statistics show the numbers have gone down a bit from a high of 8,000 something, but the pattern is that it's at least 6,000 per year. Oops. I was reading a story about the campaign to resist, to protest, to end femicide in Kenya, with just quite powerful examples. Of course, I think people have been paying attention to the Giselle Pellicot case in France of mass rape. Okay. And so we have plenty of things to think about, and it might seem that fiction could serve to distort or dilute concern for or deflect attention from the facts that should occupy us. So it's actually quite nice. John was kind of introducing the issues here that I'm going to try to follow through on. What can be said on behalf of the fictional as a mode of representation and a vehicle of reflection on gender-based violence? So I'm just kind of initiating some thinking about this. You'll see it's pretty programmatic, but I'm hoping helpful. Now, before I get into the speaking on behalf of, I just want to articulate some of these worries about turning to fiction, which I'll sometimes abbreviate just with an F, as a way of encountering or reflecting on gender-based violence. Well, one thing is, doing so, that is, reflecting on gender-based violence, is unlikely to be the point of picking up a novel. It's not like we're going to be aiming to do that when we choose or come across a work of fiction, I think. Is that a problem? If you really want to highlight this as an issue and something we need to understand, well, I don't think so. I mean, that the reflection might happen, as it were, sort of indirectly or in spite of ourselves or something. I think that's how a lot of good reflection happens. And in any case, gender-based violence isn't what you might call the point of anyone's life, even if it is a dominating fact in a life. And to the extent that fiction will always do more than have one issue to devote its attention to the extent that it does more than that, I think that can help to show this, to say this is not the point of a life. I'm going to go quite quickly through actually sort of tricky points. Anyway, I think this has already come up, especially in Chantal Meza's talk. There's this issue of the articulation of the inarticulable, the project of giving words to experiences of pain and failures of comprehension that should not be conceptually tidied up. Is that a problem with turning to fiction? Well, there is a lot that should be known that can be articulated. And the language and structure of fiction do not always tidy things up. And so I just think you always need to read and find out what a given work does in this respect. How do they manage this, the inarticulable? How is it somehow given a place? And I think writers do this in all kinds of ways. Fiction and the drive for the happy ending or the resolved ending at any rate, maybe that's a problem. You know, is that just a distortion, an inevitable misrepresentation of the depth of difficulty and irresolution in the life that includes violence? Okay, yes, fiction certainly does this, and some of my examples are going to do this. And maybe that's something to wrestle with, I think. But what can I say? Happy, hopeful trajectories are not in themselves wrong. I mean, let's seek them if we can. And in any case, I just think we can always ask, does the work do anything useful or revelatory in getting there? Even if you want to sort of really frame that happy, hopeful thing that a work of fiction might offer in a highly qualified way. Oops. What about fiction and entertainment value? What if it makes gender-based violence fascinating, the stuff of engrossing storytelling, and somehow an object of the wrong kind of attention? And here I would quote Jacqueline Rose, and this is something she says in the book about a problem or a risk in writing about violence, how to convey the psychic intensities released by the subject of violence without fanning the flames, adding to the spectacle, making the analysis complicit with the crime. There is always a risk of turning sexual violence into the crime we love to hate. And I suppose nothing I'm saying is, I think she's saying you don't get rid of that risk. That is a risk, but maybe it's like, it's a risk, or it's a responsibility for readers. Like, watch, what are you doing? What are you enjoying here? Can you resist certain kinds of attention? Okay. And I just want to cite a few more claims from Rose that you'll see. I'm not going to do justice to them, but they're kind of at work in the things I was thinking about. Okay, so she says, in every case, the writing takes us deep into parts of the world, crying out unambiguously for justice, while refusing to reduce by one iota the contrary pathways of the mind. So I just think she's very eloquent about this. You kind of want the clarity, this is unjust, this needs writing, but you also you have to be alive to the conflict-ridden, the weird pathways of human experience and thought. She says, in fictional writing, the experience of violence can be told in ways that defy both the discourse of politicians and the defenses of thought. It is a great challenge in the fight against violence today, or a great challenge, is to expose it, to call for legal redress without sacrificing the ungovernable aspects of human sexuality, not least because bringing sexuality to heel would be a pretty accurate descriptor of sexual violence itself. So again, I think she's setting up a really interesting challenge. break down our political rhetoric, break down our very own defenses of thought, and maybe let something ungovernable come into presence. I think she's just very interested in not making sexuality something that is inhuman or not the fully human thing it is. She says, it is crucial for me that even while calling out masculinity in its worst guise, we allow to individual men the potential gap between maleness and the infinite complexity of the human mind. And she thinks it would be sort of contrary to feminist commitments to not allow the same internal breathing space to men that we're trying to grant to women. So I will have an example where I feel like this is being wrestled with. And finally, she says, my sister, the philosopher Gillian Rose, taught at Warwick, wrote of the equivocation of the ethical, by which she meant the importance of not assuming that ethical rightness is something that anybody completely owns. If we do not make time for thought, which must include the equivocations of our inner lives, we will do nothing to end violence in the world, while we will surely be doing violence to ourselves. So I take this to put another, like a responsibility on readers to, even if you're kind of seeking moral clarity, to not claim it too confidently. And I think these works of fiction, for me, they do this. They're like, oh, I sort of think I know what's what here, but then I don't, and so on. Okay. So here are some very broad points I'm going to try to illustrate or at least point you in the direction of via some literary examples. So I am going to start talking about some examples, and there's something autobiographical here. I've picked in three of the four cases works that were some of the initial places I ever encountered gender-based violence in writing. Okay, so I'm sort of going back into my past, and I hope I don't do that in too indulgent a way. I just think, for me, they were powerful, hoping they are a bit for you too. So anyway, what can the literary form do? Well, I think it can use the resources of symbol, of audacious metaphor, and yes, all kinds of artifice that nonetheless can help gender-based violence register powerfully. The work of fiction, especially the novel, but other forms too, but the novel's really clued into this, or devoted to it, is that it can attend to the social sphere beyond the abusive event or relationship, to the networks around it that support it, the possible alliances that could maybe help unravel the abuse, to failures of allegiance, failures of support. The novel can really pay attention to the social existence of gender-based violence. How is it anchored or nurtured, as it were? Getting back to Rose, the novel or the work of fiction can be very, like, part of what grabs us is that it pays attention to the complexity and contrary pathways of the human mind. Okay, so I'll try to give a little hint of that. I think you already know this, but what is it like? And finally, fiction it's one of the places where we actually try to let writers try to give and readers try to, as it were, undergo morally charged thinking and questioning. And this is stuff that is relevant to our lives, but we ourselves, in the living, through whatever faces us, we may never muster it, or we may be actively discouraged from mustering moral reflection. And so here's a chance to do it. And there's some way in which this can be very unrealistic to what we actually understand about our lives, but we still do need it. And the work of fiction can give us a purchase on this or give us an entry into it. See if I can be reminded later. Okay. So I'm going to start with go through some examples. There's a lot going on in every example. I'm going to do like just kind of a few things with each one. So first one is a work that I think it was one of the works that got me just like confused and thinking about what counts as violence. Okay, so here's from the first part of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Okay, so the mother, Mrs. Ramsay, is sitting with her son, and the husband, Mr. Ramsay, is roaming around, lurking, and coming to get her attention. And it was sympathy he wanted, to be assured of his genius, first of all, and then to be taken within the circle of life, warmed and soothed, to have his senses restored to him, his barrenness made fertile, and all the rooms of the house made full of life. He must have sympathy. He must be assured that he too lived in the heart of life, was needed, not here only, but all over the world. Flashing her needles, confident, upright, she created drawing room and kitchen, set them all aglow, bade him take his ease there, go in and out, enjoy himself. She laughed, she knitted. Standing between her knees, very stiff, James felt all her strength flaring up to be drunk and quenched by the beak of brass, the arid scimitar of the male, which smote mercilessly again and again, demanding sympathy. Okay, so lots of stuff here about what's the social formation of the woman and the man and the child and Freudian things we could talk about. But what I couldn't quite comprehend when I vaguely remember first reading this was this beak of brass, the arid scimitar of the male. It's like, where is that coming from? He's asking her for sympathy, and it's a matter of being smote mercilessly. So I'm not trying to, I mean, it's not that we could just say, oh, Woolf is right that this can be a merciless smiting. But it was for me it was like very useful metaphor or its imagery that took me somewhere I hadn't gone to about how much pressure can be put on the woman in this case to be something needed by another. And so it's sort of this innocuous moment, mother and father and child chatting, playing, but there's an arid scimitar in there. And so I'm just handing this to you as one of these passages where I think the literary work is saying it's not, you have to think boldly here. You have to try to see how someone might be experiencing this kind of deformation of her life. Now, skip way to the end of the novel, and this is a little bit, Mrs. Ramsay dies, and it comes together with the artist, Lily Briscoe, coming back to this holiday home in the Hebrides, and Mr. Ramsay is there doing exactly the same thing to Lily. And then, this was one of those moments when an enormous need urged him, without being conscious what it was, to approach any woman, to force them. He did not care how. His need was so great to give him what he wanted, sympathy. Was anybody looking after her, he said? Had she everything she wanted? Oh, thanks, everything, said Lily Briscoe nervously. No, she could not do it. She ought to have floated off instantly upon some wave of sympathetic expansion. The pressure on her was tremendous. but she remained stuck. There was an awful pause. And I don't know how, like, again, it's hard to sum it up the whole force of a novel, but Woolf lavishes attention on this scene where Mr. Ramsay just keeps trying to get Lily to do what Mrs. Ramsay used to do, and she just can't and won't. And as the reader, it's just wonderfully satisfying. This is a kind of happy ending. I mean, it's not a happy ending in many other ways, but you're like, yes, she's not going to do it. What she ends up doing is actually quite funny. She ends up finally saying she likes his boots, which is really not what he wanted to hear. And yet, the other thing Woolf does is it turns out to be a better thing to say to him, because it takes his mind off himself, and he actually does love his boots, and they talk about the boots. So it's just, anyway, okay. So there's a little example. What is violence? Is this violence? How do you get it into words, maybe, or how do you get readers to think about it? Okay, now I'm going to go back again to this time in my life, but this is to Alice Walker's The Color Purple. And if you know it, it has this epistolary form that's, you'll see, pretty audacious, I think. It's got symbolism, but it is also, at a very basic level, it's giving a voice to a character who would not have had such a voice. So there's something very artificial about what's going on. This is not realistic in a sense, even though the events being told have quite visceral reality to it. But this is the first thing you read. So this is the first page of the novel. Or I get a little bit onto the next couple pages. There's this italicized line at the top. You better not never tell nobody but God. It'd kill your mammy. And you realize this is her father. She thinks it's her father. It turns out it's her stepfather. But anyway, her father's voice in her head. So then, dear God, I am 14 years old. I am, crossed out, I have always been a good girl. Maybe you can give me a sign, letting me know what is happening to me. We get down to the scene of the rape. You gonna do what your mammy wouldn't. So this is the father. I'm not giving you the description. When that hurt, I cry. He start to choke me, saying, you better shut up and get used to it. But I don't never get used to it. So this is the first thing you come across in this novel. And I just had never read a novel that began this way. And it's got a brutal rape scene right in the first page, and very, very simply told. Okay, so there's this kind of use of the form, but use of the letter form. Page or so later, this is her mother. She asked me about the first one, whose it is. I say God's. I don't know no other man or what else to say. So, of course, the epistolary form is what allows this character to have a voice, because what's clear is she can't actually talk about this to anyone. And the loneliness of having to write to God, I think, is very powerful. That's the only person to talk to here, even though you might feel really God has abandoned her. But that's where she can turn. And the novel gives her somewhere to turn. I'll go on to a little later. So same novel, just to give a little sense of how the social sphere is handled and the failures and the achievement of allegiance and of sisterhood can be can unfold. Okay, so she has a stepdaughter-in-law, although they're probably about the same age. She's finally left the family home. She's married to a much older man who has all sorts of children, including Harpo, who himself is married. And one of the awful scenes in the novel is when Harpo asks Seeley, that's the main character's name, asks Seeley for advice on how to deal with his wife, Sophia. And Seeley tells him to beat her. Seeley is being beaten by Harpo's father, and she tells Harpo to beat Sophia. This goes very badly for all concerned. Anyway, Sophia finally confronts Seeley and says, "You told Harpo to beat me," she said. "No, I didn't," I said. "Don't lie," she said. "I didn't mean it," I said. "Then what you say it for?" she asked. She stand there looking me straight in the eye. She looked tired and her jaws full of air. "I say it because I'm a fool," I say. "I say it because I'm jealous of you. I say it because you do what I can't." "What that?" she say. "Fight," I say. So part of what The Color Purple does, and this is how you finally get to what you might call a happy ending, is it allows Seeley to build allegiances with sister figures. It often takes a really long, hard battle because they are jealous of each other. They have reasons. They are put in positions of conflict with each other. But thank you, Alice Walker, you get to see them finally sorting out that they should be allies. And this is one place where this is a scene where that's happening. Okay, I'm going to keep going. How am I doing? Next example, this is Khaled Hosseini's A Thousand Splendid Suns, so Suns, S-U-N-S, and it does follow especially one woman from childhood onto adulthood and death, and she has an extremely difficult path through life. But what the novel, and it's really extremely ambitious in what it packs in. You kind of get a kind of history of mid-20th century to end of century Afghanistan, and it's a brutal history. And she's following it from a very unprivileged vantage point, but it's an illuminating vantage point. You sort of think, yes, everyone should know what was it like to be this kind of woman in this time period. And she is given to a much older man as his wife, I think she's 15. He just wants her to bear a son for him, which she fails to do. She has many miscarriages. But eventually he marries again, and that turns out to be crucial for her because, again, it's the sort of the same plot. They are in conflict. The two wives are in conflict for quite a while, but they finally forge an incredibly strong friendship. Okay, so female friendship sort of becomes the plot, even though along the way they are both the targets of violence from this same man. And there's just a general pileup of violence in the military activities coming from all sides in Afghanistan. Okay, so here's her mother at the very beginning. This is like the message the mother, who's a very difficult figure, gives to her daughter, Mariam. The mother has Mariam out of wedlock. So she's talking about the man, Mariam's father. "You know what he told his wives by way of defense? That I forced myself on him, that it was my fault. This is what it means to be a woman in this world. Learn this now and learn it well, my daughter. Like a compass needle that points north, a man's accusing finger always finds a woman, always." So the mother is a voice of moral confidence. The mother is like, this is going to happen to you. It's going to happen over and over. And for much of the novel, it's like, yes, mother is right. Listen to your mother. But of course, the novel, it does undermine the moral confidence too. I'll just tell you, go read the novel. But still, powerful launch to this girl's life. I'm just giving you one. I'm trying to avoid the visceral accounts of beatings, which are really, well, they're visceral. But anyway, the husband of Miriam, this older man, raised the belt again, and this time came at Miriam. Then an astonishing thing happened. The girl, this is the second wife, lunged at him. She grabbed his arm with both hands and tried to drag him down, but she could do no more than dangle from it, his arm. In the end, Miriam knew there would be no beating, not that night. So the other wife has finally intervened on her behalf. A little later, Miriam says, the other night when nobody's ever stood up for me before. Layla, the second wife, examined Miriam's drooping cheeks, the eyelids that sagged in tired folds, the deep lines that framed her mouth. She saw these things as though she too were looking at someone for the first time. And for the first time, it was not an adversary's face Layla saw, but a face of grievances unspoken, burdens gone unprotested, a destiny submitted to and endured. So here's sort of this issue of the witness, or the other person who can see what you've gone through, and somehow separate you a bit from the fact of the abuse. Now, this novel provides at the end what you might find completely unlikely peace for this character, Miriam, and providing a certain kind of moral reflection and giving meaning to her life where, given what she's gone through, you might think that meaning might have been stamped out for her. Like, is it really possible for someone who goes through a real person going through what Miriam went through, would she be able to reach this moment? I'm going to show you. And I just have to spoil the plot of the novel a little bit. Miriam and Layla eventually kill Rashid, and Miriam takes the blame, and she is tried and found guilty, and so she's going to be executed. So this is right before that happens. Though there had been moments of beauty in it, Miriam knew that life, for the most part, had been unkind to her. But as she walked the final 20 paces, she could not help but wish for more of it. Near the goalpost, the man behind her asked her to stop. Miriam did. Through the crisscrossing grid of the burqa, she saw his shadow arms lift his shadow Kalashnikov. He's behind her. As she closed her eyes, it was not regret any longer, but a sensation of abundant peace that washed over her. She thought of her entry into this world, the harami child, illegitimate child, we might say in English, of a lowly villager, an unintended thing, a pitiable, regrettable accident, a weed. And yet she was leaving the world as a woman who had loved and been loved back, a person of consequence at last. Kneel here, Hamshira, sort of sister, and look down. One last time, Miriam did as she was told. So here's what fiction can do. I'm just assuming, I don't know, can you be about to be executed and have this kind of peaceful resolution of a really, in some objective sense, a ghastly life? The novel gives this to her. And I think that's what, a novel can legitimately do this. It's because her life deserves this moral reflection. It deserves this. She might, the person may not be capable of it, but someone is capable of it, and maybe the novelist is, and maybe the reader can enter into this with the help of the novelist. Okay. Oops. Finally, just going to look a little bit at Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye. And this is an autobiographical note for me, too. This was another of the works of fiction I read kind of early on in my life with like lots of ignorance and naivete, like just you can, and it's a difficult read. But if you want to, I think Morrison, part of her brilliance is this contrary pathways accounting. And with sexuality, she's not afraid of that at all. Okay, so I'm starting with the parents of the central character, Pekkola, Charlie and Mrs. Breedlove. Usually the mother is called Mrs. Breedlove. You can sort of figure out why. So they have a very difficult marriage, although their relationship starts out beautiful, and Morrison makes that very potent for the reader, that this is a love relationship to begin with. Why am I not? Okay. But it turns into a violent marriage. In these violent breaks in routine that were themselves routine, she could display the style and imagination of what she believed to be her own true self. That's Mrs. Breedlove. Charlie, the husband, by his habitual drunkenness and orneriness, provided them both with the material they needed to make their lives tolerable. Mrs. Breedlove considered herself an upright and Christian woman, burdened with a no-count man whom God wanted her to punish. She needed Charlie's sins desperately. The lower he sank, the wilder and more irresponsible he became, the more splendid she and her task became. No less did Charlie need her. She was one of the few things abhorrent to him that he could touch and therefore hurt. Charlie and Mrs. Breedlove fought each other with a darkly brutal formalism that was paralleled only by their lovemaking. Tacitly, they had agreed not to kill each other. Okay, I don't know, I just want to say everything coming together there. Morrison is trying to get inside a sort of mutually devastating marriage that nonetheless persists. Okay, so I think there's lovemaking and there's hitting each other. Those are entwined. All right, I am, if you don't know this novel, or it's more like a novella, it's pretty short, I'm going to, again, tell you something that's sort of the heart of the awfulness. You might think that's the heart of the awfulness, but no, there's more awfulness. So Charlie and Mrs. Breedlove's daughter, Pekkola, is sort of the focal point of the novel. She turns out to be the young black girl who wants blue eyes. That's kind of the metaphor of the novel. Anyway, Charlie comes home, sees her washing the dishes. His revulsion was a reaction to her young, helpless, hopeless presence, her back hunched that way, her head to one side, as though crouching from a permanent and unrelieved blow. The clear statement of her misery was an accusation. He wanted to break her neck, but tenderly. Guilt and impotence rose in a bilious duet. What could he do for her, ever? What could a burned-out black man say to the hunched back of his 11-year-old daughter? How dare she love him? His hatred of her slimed in his stomach. She shifted her weight and stood on one foot, scratching the back of her calf with her toe. It was a quiet and pitiful gesture. He put his head down and nibbled at the back of her leg, the rigidness of her shocked body, the silence of her stunned throat. He rapes her. She appeared to have fainted. Charlie stood up and could see only her grayish panties, so sad and limp around her ankles. Again, the hatred mixed with tenderness. The hatred would not let him pick her up. The tenderness forced him to cover her. Okay, and I'll just give you a little bit from the very end of the novel. This is sort of the authorial voice coming in through the narrator of the novel, another young girl, Claudia. Anyway, oh, some of us loved her, and Charlie loved her. I'm sure he did. He, at any rate, was the one who loved her enough to touch her, envelop her, give something of himself to her. But his touch was fatal. There is no gift for the beloved. Okay. I won't try to, I guess I'm just thinking of what Rose was saying. One thing Morrison won't do is let you just hate Charlie. You can't. And there are very few characters in her novels where you don't get the backstory that somehow reframes what's gone on in their lives so that they are now doing what they're doing, that you revile. But you cannot, this is the equivocation, you can't just judge him. Okay, some final thoughts. Fiction gives us license to seek intimacy with fictional beings in a way that would be inappropriate, I think, ethically aggressive and intrusive often with real people. So I think this is a very important function of it. You kind of shouldn't know some of the stuff about real people that you can and should or are like made to know about fictional characters. When you're doing this, the artifice of fiction must be held in mind. We are not getting the truth of someone's life, which is rarely on offer anyway. Fiction is rather a chance to find out how another human has represented or tried to evoke what is important to human life. So I think that framing is always there and always really important. Like someone is trying this out as a way to get at something important. And you just have to have that functioning in your experience. But hope these illustrations are kind of hinted at this, that we can hope to find in fiction access to things that are difficult for us within the living of life and that are less common or less possible achievements in other forms, such as journalism, which is crucial, or memoir may be similar, but still, I think fiction can do certain things that are less easy for other forms to manage. So it has access to the resources of audacious symbol and metaphor to help gender-based violence register powerfully. This kind of searching, pivoting attention to social spheres in which gender-based violence occurs, to the details of the sites of power, responsibility, alliance, support, the failures therein. So it's naming some of the ways in which gender-based violence is sustained and can be fought. There is a respect for, an exploration, and honoring of the complexity and contrary pathways of the human mind, including the complexity of abusers. And there's this morally charged thinking and questioning that's, I think, really hard to achieve in one's own life. In fiction, this can shift perspectives radically, and you might feel sometimes even very high-handedly. But in the hands of good writers, these moral claims are allowed to be hard to own unequivocally. Okay, I'll stop there.